What is this crazy looking thing called a histogram? Why is it so important, and how is it going to become one of your best friends in certain circumstances? Well, let's get into this. So first of all, a histogram is basically just a graph that measures the true brightness of your photo. Now, what do I mean by the true brightness? Well, when you look at a photo on a screen, whether it's your phone or a computer, you don't know if you're seeing the true brightness of your photo. Why? Well, because you can turn suppose you're looking at a dark photo and it's hard to see. Well, you can just turn the brightness of your screen up. Now, here's the thing. Yes, it made the photo brighter, but only as far as the photo is displayed. It didn't actually make the photo brighter. In order to make the photo brighter, you'd have to edit the photo. But even in editing the photo, how do you know you're seeing the true brightness of the photo since you're seeing it on a screen and maybe the screen is too bright or too dark? How are you ever going to know? Well, here's a couple of situations where the histogram is going to be very handy for you, and I'll show you how to read a histogram in a moment. So if you have ever been out, let's say at a park, photographing some kids or whatever it may be, and you're taking pictures and then you display them, you press play and you look at them on the back of your camera, but there's so much glare and it's so bright out from the sun that you can't really see the back of your camera properly, and you're trying to shade it, and it's just, you can't really tell whether your picture is bright enough or not. Well, the histogram will tell you whether it's bright or not. So you just have to enable the histogram so that when you press play on your camera and you review your photos, the histogram pops up as part of your photo. If you don't know how to do that, just Google whatever camera you're using, like Canon Rebel T3i plus histogram and the word histogram, and then hopefully you'll find a tutorial that just shows you quickly how to enable the histogram on your camera. I was photographing a wedding a few years ago, and I snapped a few pictures outside, and they looked so dark on my screen, on the camera screen. So I messed around with the settings. I hardly knew what I was doing, and I ended up, when I got home later and looked at the photos on my laptop, they were way too bright. Some of them were bleached out, like the wedding dress, for example, which is white, was just bleached out, pure white. Like you couldn't see the detail of this pretty wedding dress. It was just ruined. It was a blob of whiteness, and I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done to their photos? And if only I had known about the histogram, I would have known whether the photo was bright enough or not. Maybe you have printed a photo that looks beautiful on a screen, but then you get your prints back and they are really dull or dark looking. Why did that happen? Well, because even though the screen was nice and bright, your true photo was actually pretty dark. So the histogram is going to tell you the true brightness of your photo, even if it's hard to see the photo on the back of your camera, as long as you can read that graph, which I'll show you in a second. And even if your screen is too bright or too dark, giving you a misinterpretation of the photo, you will know by the histogram whether it's bright enough or not. I can tell by looking at this histogram that whatever photo this is for is way too dark. I'll show you how to read this in a second. I can tell by looking at this histogram that whatever the photo is for this histogram, that it's mostly bright enough, but some of it has become too bright. Well, let's see how to read a histogram. This is a good example of of a photo to work with, and you'll see why in a second. It's because it's so dark and so bright. Okay, so first, how to read the histogram. So you'll see the histogram over here. Now, don't worry about these numbers. These are irrelevant for the moment. So notice the chart. Okay, so basically what your camera does is it measures the brightness of every single dot of light in your photo, because a photograph is made out of light. And there are millions of these dots on each photo, and it measures them, and then it plots them on this graph. So the black ones, or very, very, very dark ones, end up over here. The dark but not totally dark ones end up over here, so we're starting to get brighter. The midtones, or the just average brightness level, ends up over here. The highlights, or the fairly bright parts, end up over here. And then the super bright parts, maybe parts that have turned to pure white, end up over here. So we go from dark to bright going in this direction. So let me just erase that and talk through this photograph. So you notice his hair is really bright in around here. You notice the sky is bright, and there's a couple other bright things in this photograph. All of that brightness is basically represented in this part of the histogram here. You can see a very small part of the photo is quite bright, and a lot of the photo is on the dark side of the histogram. So when I took this picture, I knew that it was too dark, and I adjusted my camera, and I'll show you in a second. But notice over here, we got a lot of really dark spots in around here, really dark all up in around here. And then we have some like normal brightness in around here, but very little of this photo is actually normal brightness. Okay, so I took another shot and I made my photo brighter. Now, how do you make your photo brighter or darker on the next shot? That is for another video. If you know how to use manual mode, then you know how to make your photo brighter. So you take a picture, you enable the histogram, you see, uh-oh, this picture is too dark. You make some adjustments, you take another picture, you look at the histogram, and you go, oh, that's a lot better. Now we're starting to push those pixels into the brighter region. They're still kind of dark, but you know there is a lot of darkness and shadowy stuff here. But also in brightening your photo, you have made the bright spots like his hair even brighter. And now we are running into the problem of overexposing parts of our photo. Overexposing means you've made it too bright. And when a part of a photo gets too bright, it basically becomes pure white. And then that's it. It's just a blob of pure whiteness. And you might think, well, I'll just edit it. I'll darken it in editing. But what happens when you darken something that's white? Well, you just make it gray. Now you have a gray blob. The idea is to get it, you know, in a sense, as bright as you can, but stopping before it becomes pure white. And so the histogram is going to help you to make sure that your photo is actually bright enough. You know, it's not too dark like that first shot I took, and it's also not too bright. Now, what happens if you don't know manual mode? Well, you can use exposure compensation. Let's say you're using aperture mode or shutter mode on your camera, and then you can use exposure compensation to tell your camera to make the next photo brighter or darker, whatever you need. Check out my micro lesson on exposure compensation because it's going to become your best friend as well. Okay, so that's basically how you read a histogram. What do you think about this photo here? Take a look at it. Tell me, is it too bright or too dark? I would say that this photo is too dark. I would like it if this peak here was nudged over a little bit. So if instead of being there, it was more like this. Possibly, if I was going to print it more like this, because when you print something, it's a lot more dull. When you're looking at a screen, you're literally looking at a photograph that is just made out of light. Your screen is just pure light. And when you look at something on a piece of paper, then it's only going to be kind of as bright as the light that you're in, right? If you're looking at a paper photograph in dim light, it's going to look dim, and in bright light, it's going to look brighter. So if I know I'm going to print a photo, I prefer to brighten the photo until it looks, you know, somewhat close to this. That way I know it's going to be nice and bright when it prints. You're going to have to experiment a little bit. After a while, you'll get used to knowing what the histogram is trying to tell you. A photograph like this is not too bad. It's getting there. I do think that I would want it to be a little bit brighter, but one thing that I would want to be careful of course, as I was brightening it, either by taking a second picture or by editing, is to make sure that his face, which is fairly bright, and his hair doesn't get too bright. And I'm going to be looking at this part of the histogram right over here. So there we go. That is how to read a histogram. Remember, it's dark over here, it's bright over here. Everything in between is either kind of dark or kind of bright or just right. And you're aiming for your photo to be as bright as possible without accidentally overexposing it. But keep in mind, when I tell you your photo needs to be as bright as possible, If you're trying to take a picture of a dark, moody scene, it is perfectly fine that there ends up being a lot of darkness over here. For example, I wish I had a sample of this, but you've probably seen a picture of a candle in a dark room. Most of the histogram on a picture like that is going to be over here. There's going to be a lot of darkness, and then there's going to be a lot of brightness. The brightness is the candle light. The darkness is the dark room. So that's okay. You just have to remember that if your photos are consistently coming out too bright or too dark, take a look at the histogram while you're photographing, and it will be your guide.